also want to ask you about Britain, right? So not that long ago, Keir Starmer. So what's the deal with this Chagos Islands? So there's some controversial
Yeah.
about how Keir Starmer handled that. Can you explain that to me,
Oh,
to my
this is this
audience?
is this is a wonderful tale of British imperialism and duplicity and all of these things. Right, the Chagos Islands are in the Pacific. They're a little place in the Pacific Ocean.
Hmm.
Um, the British occupied it. They brought people from various places, I believe mostly from India, but I'm not
Okay.
sure where. But I mean, they're not the indigenous people of the Chagos Islands,
Okay.
but they brought them there to live there and to work under basically semi-slave conditions in local plantations and doing all of those things. The sort of thing that the British uh, did, but never like to talk about today. Anyway, so there they were, those people living on those islands until the 1960s, when the British decided, or rather the Americans decided, that they needed an enormously powerful and enormous airbase in the Chagos Islands to dominate the Southern Pacific. And first and foremost, by the way, this is the mid 60s, mind you, to deter China. I mean, exactly. I mean, at that time, I mean, already you see China was being spoken about then. So they go to the British, they say, we want to build this base on this island. The British, of course, agree. The British then round up all the people that they brought to the Chagos Islands and deport them. Most of them end up in Britain. They have a very, very hard time here. The mortality rate among them is terrible. It's then gradually acknowledged, largely as a result of anger and sense of guilt by many people in Britain itself, ordinary people,
Hmm.
and also by members of the British legal community, that what was done to these people was outrageous and wrong. I knew, by the way, the leading lawyer who represented the Chagos Islanders over many, many difficult years, long, difficult court cases. Eventually, it was acknowledged that these islanders have been treated abysmally. So they've been compensated, which is, of course, long after the event. There's been a decision made that they have a right to return to the Chagos Islands, but this is, well, 50 years, more than 50 years after they were removed from there. Many of them have completely lost whatever connection to the Chagos Islands that they had. This has been a hugely embarrassing episode for the British. So, what did they decide to do? The Americans want to keep their base. They're worried about the fact that the British have made all these decisions with the Chagos Islanders. The British decide that they're going to dump this problem onto the Mauritius. So they canned over the island to Mauritius, which did have a historic link to the Chagos Islands, but which was never, and this is an important thing to say, never an administering country. I mean, the Chagos Islands, as I said, in the past were completely uninhabited, before the British came. So they handed over to Mauritius. And the result is a huge outcry in the media here in Britain, amongst especially the imperialistic, unreconstructed right wing media, about the fact that we've handed over this island, this important British territory, to Mauritius. We've given up another part of the empire when we didn't need to. And what have we done? We've given it up to Mauritius, which is a good friend of enemy number one, which is China. So it always comes back to that. Ultimately, it comes back once more to the issue of China.
Well, and then at the same,
Let me repeat what I said in our last program. With the Americans and with the British, it's always China in the end. It always is. This Chagos story is all about China in the end. Not, I mean, all kinds of crimes and things are done there, ultimately because of some fictitious, imaginary threat from China. In the mid 1960s, China dominating the South. I mean, it was absurd then. And today, as I said, it's a terrible betrayal that we've handed over this island with this important base to Mauritius, because Mauritius has good relations with China, which must mean that it is unreliable, a Chinese ally, and who knows what it will do to the space. Tiny Mauritius will boot out the Americans, apparently.
Isn't it exhausting? When I listen to it, it's exhausting. They're always thinking about this. They could, I mean, United States in particular could have a very easy life, just enjoy the
Yeah.
life here. There are plenty of natural resources, plenty of land. It's far away from the Eurasia, the big problem there, but
Yeah.
they just cannot enjoy life, but they have to make their life so complicated. And
Yeah. Well, you're completely correct. And of course, the amount of energy, mental energy, and psychic energy that is wasted on this. We're going back to Brzezinski's book about the grand chessboard. Instead of thinking about your own problems in your own country, you're thinking about the moves you're going to make on this chessboard. As you correctly said, I mean, life could be so pleasurable and
yeah.
so easy, but we're wasting our time worrying about the fact that Mauritius, tiny Mauritius, has good relations with China. Why wouldn't it want to have good relations with China?
And the King Charles is now visiting Australia. So there is the
Yeah,
indigenous MP, Lydia Thorpe, was heckling him,
yeah.
asking, give us back our land and stuff like that.
Mm.
What's the reaction in Britain about this? And are people talking about the future of the Commonwealth? Are there any discussions?
Right. Well, let's start with the first thing. To answer your question, the big media are not talking about this
Uh-huh.
because, of course, they protect the monarchy, they protect the person of the king, and all of that. If you're talking about independent media, to the extent that it exists here in Britain, and what you see on tweets and places like that, people are talking about it, and they are aware of it, and they are. I mean, one mustn't characterize most British people by the sort of lunacies that you read in the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail. Most people in Britain who do think about these things, and many people in Britain do think about these things, are very ashamed about the history. I mean, there were the protests about the slavers that we saw a couple of years ago. People know about these things and they do care. And as I think I've said in previous programs, there's always been an anti imperialist current in British life, and it
Mhm.
has always come from below. And it's still there and it's still strong. And uh, they're aware of what happened to the indigenous people of Australia, the terrible way they were treated, and they feel a significant guilt about this. So that current does exist, and it is there. The Commonwealth. Well,
Yeah.
this is actually an interesting story, because up to the 1980s, the Commonwealth was a very big thing in Britain. There was it was talked about all the time. We had sports competitions every year called the Commonwealth Games.
Mhm.
It was a very much part of the life of the political life of Britain. The reality is, since the 1980s, it has faded away.
Mhm.
It's very little thought about or discussed anymore. And it does exist, and it does have some kind of shadowy existence. But I don't think many people in Britain, apart from a few people at the Foreign Office and the court, take it very seriously anymore. I think that in 10 years' time it will have gone, and I doubt that very many people will notice.
So Australia is in the Commonwealth right now, right? Is
Yeah,
India
yeah.
still in the Commonwealth?
No, yes, it is, absolutely.
Oh,
It
okay.
is. But if you talk about India, I mean,
Uh-huh.
India is far more interested in being a member of the BRICS than it
Yeah.
is about being a member of the Commonwealth. I mean, it's I mean, there used to be Commonwealth summits where
Okay.
the Indian Prime Minister always used to go.
Hmm.
I never hear about them anymore.
Okay. All right. So your prediction is in 10 years' time, it will be gone. Okay.
It'll have gone. I mean, it will have. I mean, it's already faded into complete irrelevance. You never see it discussed any longer in the media here.
Yeah. And I mean, there are a lot of countries. Canada is also in there,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
well, then that
I
will
mean,
have,
yeah. Go on, go on,
well,
go
then
on.
it will have some impact for these countries. Then they will have
Yeah,
their own president and stuff like that, right?
as they should. I ought to say that the Commonwealth is a complicated pattern of states because there are countries like India which are completely independent but are part of the Commonwealth, which is a kind of club.
Yeah.
And then there are countries that are dominions in that the sense that they're not republics. They're
Hmm.
not fully independent states of Britain, at least notionally, they're not. So
Okay.
the King of Great Britain is also the King of Canada and
Hmm.
the King of Australia. He is represented in Australia and Canada by a viceroy, by a governor,
Hmm.
who actually has the power to appoint and dismiss the prime minister there. In the 1970s, the Queen's governor in Australia simply decided that he didn't like the prime minister of Australia and dismissed him, for example. And at the start of the First and Second World Wars, um, the British king, in both cases, declared war on Germany on Canada's and Australia's behalf,
Okay.
despite the fact that these were supposed to be dominions. So they, as well as being members of the Commonwealth, they still have that connection. But in both countries, both in Australia and in Canada, there are very strong Republican movements. And I think, especially in Australia, sooner or later, they will become proper republics and fully independent states. And when that happens, the Commonwealth will end.
Will collapse. Yeah. Okay.
Mm,
The U.S. elections. Okay.
mm,
What is your take on? I think there is a panic mode among the Democrat, but I just voted actually in yesterday. The day before yesterday. They have early voting. Now I have
yeah,
a problem with early voting because
yeah,
I think it's not fair. The Democrats promoted early voting a lot for
yeah,
they think it, but the thing is, I feel like if this is a sport, if we say this is the starting point, then we should all start on November 5th in this year. But there were
yeah,
plenty of promotions about early voting, and then of course the remote voting, which is a mail
yeah,
voting.
yeah,
I feel like early voting working against the newcomers a lot because the incumbent people already know them. It is the newcomers that need time to let people know them, and then you lose that time. And some states they start a month early. A month is a long time, I feel like. And then in terms of mail voting, it's so easy to get fraudulent and use things like
yeah,
that. So
yeah.
what is your view on that? Like a different.
I agree with you completely. I
Uh-huh.
absolutely agree with you. I think that both early voting on the scale that is being done now in the United States and even more postal voting on the scale that it is being done in the United States undermine the integrity of the entire election process. I feel more strongly about mail in voting, massive mail in voting, than I do, if I have to be honest, about early voting because mail-in voting is not only very open to manipulation, but it undermines, for me, the principle of the secret ballot,
Hmm. Hmm.
especially when you have all these extraordinary practices like ballot harvesting, which seem to go along with it. So I find it astonishing that all of this has been allowed to happen in the United States and has been done in this covert way and
Hmm.
without any proper discussion, without, if you're going to change the electoral system, then you need to have a proper, full, thorough discussion of it, particularly when it's an electoral system which has
Yeah.
worked after a fashion reasonably well until now. All you're doing is you're undermining confidence in the electoral system, and with good cause. Now,
Hmm.
the pressure to do all of these things is coming from one side, which is the Democrats, and they're clearly doing it because they think it will maximize their chances in November which it will. But all that they're doing is it's creating bitterness and anger on the other side, as we saw after the 2020 election. And potentially it's going to make that even worse. By the way, I agree with you about the sense of panic that is starting to spread. We'll see how far that goes.
Well, because of their panic, so they use all their,
Yeah,
things that within their power to
yeah,
promote early voting and posting
yeah,
voting, etc.
yeah,
And this time, I'm just joking. I actually took a picture of my ticket, what I voted, and I actually voted the third party. I don't like either of the candidates for
yeah.
various reasons we talked about in the past. And I showed it to my husband. So my husband's conclusion is, okay, Virginia, if they come out and saying the Green Party get 0 vote, then we know there's a fraud because you voted 1 vote and you have evidence.
Well, there you go. Well, there you go. But on your substantive point, you're absolutely right. The fact that they sense that it's not going their way is causing them to pull all the stops out and bring out the bag of tricks and
Uh-huh.
try that all over again. And of course, if it works, it works, but it will leave poison behind, which is what always happens.
It seems to me they already started the blaming game. They already started the third or blaming the third party, blaming
Yeah,
RFK Jr., blame the Green Party. They're already doing
I
that
know.
now. It's almost like they
Absolutely.
expect to lose, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I
Yeah.
absolutely agree. I get that sense also. Anyway,
Okay.
we'll see. Still two
Yes.
weeks to go.
Yeah. Let's see. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. Great pleasure to speak to you. Speak next week.
Yes. Bye.